Welcome once more to RMTV. You've joined us here in the spring sunshine in the garden of Ed Hall, who for the last 30 years has been making banners for the Labour movement and quite a lot for RMT branches. Have you any idea how many RMT banners you've made in total?
I would be it must be creeping up to 60 or 70. It must be.
Wow. So can you talk us through the process a little bit? Just,
Yeah.
from the ground floor. I mean, how do you work? I mean, say an RMT branch has come to you and say, Ed, can you do us a banner, please? What do you do?
I prefer if they just put things in an envelope, or I pick things up at a meeting and just get the sketches and things in my mind. Then I'll send them back a very, very simple sketch, pencil and crayon. Then they'll send back amendments and that kind of thing, and then slowly we get to a design, which is agreed. Rugby RMT were very keen on the traditional banner, the silk woven banner. They wanted a banner based on the Clerkenwell banner, which had been made a long, long time ago in the full tradition of a railway banner of the sort of 1920s.
Sure.
And then the centrepiece, they wanted, I think British Rail had the lion and the crown.
Indeed.
So they wanted the railway wheel and the lion and the crown.
Yeah.
They sent me 4 things they wanted as the roundels. There was a strike of the railway workers in 1955. There's the centenary badge, the signal box at Rugby, and a tunnel, the Kilsby Tunnel, which I've been doing this morning. The slogans they obviously want united in one common object. They've replaced that with all grades united, which I think is a popular thing with the RMT, and the full name of the union in a swag, the handshake, black and white handshake.
And what you're working on here is the one with the Coronation Scot, the station centenary.
Yes.
And so you've drawn it out, and now you're
painting
it.
Yeah.
The black underneath, that's just again, you've done the outline in the same kind of dye.
Yes, I mean, I use a very, very simple technique. It's a bit like a child would do, actually. I draw the thing out with sort of boundaries of black, and I do put heavy shadows on afterwards, but that makes it much easier to sort of get the image powerful. I draw the letters out the size I want them. Then I just, with a biro, just go over them in this satin or whatever material, or use chalk and press through. Then cut them out, then iron them, then sew the letters, and then have to sew the letters on the swags. So that by the time you've finished, it's about a 5-stage process.
So every letter is individually drawn. Every letter is unique.
Yes.
You've made more than 400 banners.
Easily, yes, I would say. Yes.
You haven't kept a record.
Well, no, about 400. Yeah, I mean, I've got photographs of each one I've ever made. Fortunately, because there came a point when I thought, well, I better dig out some records and collated them. Then this is what the ones I've made recently. So Shropshire Unison with a hill fort and Shrewsbury and Ironbridge. What was that one?
Oh, it's the RMT Women's Advisory, which is another wonderful banner.
Yeah, this has got how beautiful the uniforms were. And I mean, they're quite that red jacket is quite good on Waterloo Station, but I think the long skirts and the tunics is fantastic.
And of course, the colours echo the suffragette movement.
Yes,
the green and
that
the
is
purple,
very suffragette, isn't it? And the bob haircut as well. I mean, this is the swag, which is. It's called satin, but I think it's a sort of man-made fibre, and that's stitched on with the letters onto a background, and then the centrepiece, which is actually the demonstration in favour of the Tolpuddle martyrs who were being deported at the time. The main demonstration in London was in Islington, so that's why they wanted. And then you got Tom Paine, who wrote The Rights of Man in a pub in archway or something. I mean, whether he did or not, I don't know. And then that's the Angel where he stayed to right the rights of man.
So when did you start? How did you start? How did you get into it?
Well, it was, I worked for Lambeth Council. I was an architect in their architects department, which it obviously dawned on everyone there, and there were about 800 people in the department building council houses. That
Those were the days.
that it was going to, the whole thing was going to be wiped out, and there were 800 people involved. And shortly after that, it was obvious that Thatcher was going to introduce rate capping, and local authorities would be marginalised, which they are very much. Well, they had far more power 20 or 30 years ago. People wanted banners and posters almost overnight sometimes, and that because I was a shop steward, then a convener, and then branch secretary. It was, for me, it wasn't very difficult producing stuff very quickly, and so I got more and more things to do in the Lambeth campaign. Between the disqualification of all the Lambeth councillors and the election of the new council, we put a banner up on the clock tower of Lambeth Town Hall saying that the council was now in the hands of the people. It's a bit grand, but that hung up there for some time, and we got a guy from construction services to shin up. I don't know how he did it actually, but the first one I ever made was this one, which I haven't actually got a photograph of, but it was something like Lambeth Nalgo supports the NGA, doing that whopping thing.
Gosh.
Then I began to think more and more about, well, how are these banners actually going to look? They've got to look attractive, they've got to represent the dignity of the trade union and the history of the, I sort of began to think far more about that aspect of it, really.
And of course you do it full time now.
No, I do it full time as a living now. Yeah. Yes.
This is the Manchester and North West Regional Council banner. How long did that take you, Ed?
Well, I mean, that must have taken well over 100 hours to make that. I met the secretary and his committee up in a pub just by the Piccadilly station. And then, I mean, really, if you're doing a Manchester RMT banner, the Peterloo Massacre, you virtually... and I think there's Shelley at the bottom.
It is, that's Rise Like Lions After Slumber.
So
fantastic quote.
It really designs itself. But then I had to work out, how the horses charged the crowd, and Orator Hunt and his friends. And there were women on the platform as well in Petersfield. And, that was a real making that banner was a real experience actually, because it goes right into the heart of industrial history, long before unions were legal.
There's a very long tradition of labour movement banners, from the days of the big miners' lodge banners that had to be wheeled along. They were so big and heavy, and the women's guild banners and cooperative banners. How much are you looking over your shoulder? And I mean, obviously these scenes are modern.
Yes.
But how much do you look over your shoulder at?
Well, I mean, because I make banners and people know my name now, I do give talks about banners, and I've got into the history of it. Quite frankly, Derek, I'm looking over my shoulder all the time to try and put your thoughts about your trade union visually. I think is a really interesting subject. We're in a real renaissance now because people like them and want them, but it's quite interesting, the connection between the religious banner and the trade union banner. I think there's a very strong link between nonconformism and communism, really, the way that the sort of socialism developed, I'm sure couldn't have happened without the idea of very strong working class organisation. Well,
there's a very, the early socialist movement in England, there certainly was a very, very strong moral non-conformist tradition involved in that, for sure.
A banner has to have a crosspiece, because otherwise it looks like a wet weekend. And all I do is just use, 1.25 dowel, and then, so that people can take them on the tube. They just join together with a copper sleeve.
You even supply a little carry bag for the poles.
Yes, I make the bags, but that's why I make a bag, because what happens at the end of a demonstration, first of all, the poles get lost.
Yeah.
And if they're in a bag, they're less likely.
Yeah.
And then sometimes the banner gets lost.
Yes, I wonder how many times that's happened over the years.
Yeah, well, I have made Luton NUT. I've made it. I was so proud of that, and they lost that. Unison Rochdale, they lost theirs.
Oh,
Well, the police took it because they had a BNP march in Rochdale. They all had the banners, with the trade unions, and the police are really mean. They pinch all the banners. That's their form of punishment.
But surely they have to give them back, don't they?
Well, they didn't in the case when. So they took the Rochdale banner and they never gave it back.
That's awful.
Yeah. If you go to Durham, where they are big and heavy, there are no ties. They haven't even got ties on the bottom of the banner because as a gust of wind hits it, they just blow away, and they don't have to worry. But I think the problem is when people tie the banners fiercely down onto these poles, they then go over Waterloo Bridge. These begin to just break. And if they just let them fly.
So the art is not really to tie the bottom.
No.
Just let the wind take it, and when the wind dies down, it will come back down again.
Back, yeah, I think. I think every banner's got to have 4 people, because 2 people get fed up within 40 minutes. And if they can't meet the friends, take a photograph, have a drink even, they're going to get really fed up. So it's good. I know it's not possible, but. And then the other thing is the poles must be upright and just dance in your hands, kind of thing. If you have them over your shoulder, or you're trying to fight the person at the other end, you just get incredibly fed up. So I think in other words, I think you've got to, for the time you're carrying it, you've got to be sensible and want to do it. I knew at Christmas March the 26th was coming up, and it got more and more frantic, quite honestly.
It must have been one of the busiest times in your life, I
never. Basically, since Christmas, I've just been sprinting. Really, I haven't. And one or two have hit the buffers. But. The idea of having, these great set piece demonstrations like at Tolpuddle or Burston, to see them all there, and then see them on. Great commentaries on the government, as we saw on March the 26th. I mean, that is such an amazing stage, really, to see them. I mean, there isn't a bigger stage, really, than to take your work through the middle of London. So, if I could do that for the next 10 years, I'd be very happy.
March 26th, massive amount of activity in the lead up to that, getting banners finished in time, and what a display of banners that was. You're now preparing for an exhibition in Manchester at the People's History Museum. So when does the exhibition open, Ed?
Well, it opens on May the 14th. It's open to the public, and it's free. One of the delights is with the RMT sponsoring it is so I can make sure that I get a good representation of RMT banners in the exhibition.
Thanks very much, Ed Hall, and to all those of you out there watching RMTV. Ed Hall's exhibition opens at the People's History Museum, PHM, up in Manchester on May the 14th, and it'll be running right the way through to October. So if you do get a chance, if you are anywhere near Manchester, do pop in. It will be an exhibition well worth seeing.